Coming to you from Southern California, this is Mindset, mental health news and information. I'm your host, James Curtis. On today's show.
Yeah, and that's a double whammy, being an older person with physical health problems and then also mental health problems. And I think the assumption oftentimes is that this is no longer a person.
It is May, and it is, among other things, Mental Health Awareness Month. So we are going to be examining some of the less thought about mental health issues today. Today, the double whammy of aging, the physical health decline and the deterioration of the mind. That was the voice of Northwest Missouri State psychologist Carla Edwards. We kicked off Mental Health Awareness Week at the beginning of the month last week with Professor Edwards, and she introduced us to a very, very cool stigma-fighting campaign called #IWillListen. It's on Twitter. It's on the internet. It's a social media thing. It's very, very cool, very compelling. It's out of New York City on behalf of the National Alliance on Mental Illness, the local chapter there. And Dr. Edwards is the first back-to-back guest on the Mindset Show, and we're going to hear a continuation of my original conversation with Dr. Edwards on another one of her favorite topics. That is the topic for today, geriatric psychology. And for those of you paying close attention to what I actually say here on the broadcast, when I talked about the campaign #IWillListen last week, I said I was going to have my own video uploaded as part of the I Will Listen campaign. Well, it's not done. And in large part, that's due to the rather high quality of the videos that make up that very popular social media campaign. It's going to take me a little bit more work until I can have something that is presentable, and I'm aiming for the end of the month. But first, this news from the Mindset Report. The Mindset Report available online at mindsetreport.com. The Mindset Report, your most comprehensive online source for mental health news. Today's Mindset Report is underwritten by Responsibility, a complete guide to bystander intervention. Alan Berkowitz, who is committed to the idea that the solution to health and social justice problems requires that we engage as bystanders. Responsibility is available online at lulu.com. Lulu spelled L-U-L-U. From Santa Clarita, California, senior staff writer for the Santa Clarita Valley Signal, Jim Holt, has graciously and once again agreed to join us here with an update on the wrongful death lawsuit brought by the parents of Carla Brada against Alcoholics Anonymous and some others. Jim, you got me?
Yes, I'm here.
All right. Thanks so much for taking the time, Jim. And as you know, and as you've told me, and I've read your article and other reports surrounding this case, there are more than a couple of moving parts to this story. So let me just lay them out, and then you can tie them all together for us. The first is that the base of the case, a woman named Carla Brada, who was an AA member and attended Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. In 2011, she was killed by a man that she met at the meetings. His name, Eric Earl. Earl has since been convicted of the murder and is serving a sentence of 26 years to life. Mr. and Mrs. Mendez, Carla Brada's parents, are suing the faith-based 12-step support group Alcoholics Anonymous, among others, claiming that there was a connection. Not only was there a connection between AA and their daughter's murder, but that AA has a degree of legal responsibility for their daughter's death. And when you last talked to us about the case, and when the case was last in court, Superior Court Judge Rita Miller seemed to agree with Alcoholics Anonymous lawyers that the lawsuit didn't show that AA had a legal responsibility or duty, as it's called in the law, for the death. Then there's this final part, the Cannes Film Festival, and a documentary called The 13th Step. Jim Holt, how does all that fit together?
Well, first of all, the judgment that was made by Rita Miller, the judge in Los Angeles recently, was not in favor of anything. She only granted the lawyer representing the Carla Brada's parents time to refine his lawsuit and resubmit it. And I just spoke to the lawyer this week. We sat down, and he explained to me that he has until June 15 to serve the refined, redrafted lawsuit against AA. So that's where we stand on that front.
And the Cannes Film Festival, this idea of this documentary called The 13th Step, that has something to do, this idea of 13th stepping, to do with the theory of the case. That's why Carla Brada's parents claim or seem to feel that AA, because of this 13th step phenomena, is responsible in at least in part for their daughter's murder.
Well, I can tell you this. I talked just briefly to Carla's mother, and she's very, very happy to see that the film, the documentary, The 13th Step by Monica Richardson, that won the Beverly Hills Film Festival just recently, has been moved to the world stage and is going to be screened twice at the Cannes Film Festival. And that, to her, is everything, because it reaches now the story, the plight of Carla's plight will be a story that everybody around the world will learn of, and it will, in the hopes of Carla's mother, resonate with people who are also victims around the world by the same sort of phenomena.
Now, we had about a minute left, Jim. Describe that phenomena. What does that phrase mean? What's that concept, the 13th step or 13th stepping?
I think if I haven't seen the film, but I could tell you that if there's 12 steps that they adhere to, the members of Alcoholics Anonymous, 13th step to me would mean what they don't tell you, or what happens as a consequence of having attended meetings where people are sent to them for as an option, as an alternative to incarceration, for example, and they're sent to these meetings when the people that attend them are predators in some cases, and people of a violent nature that you should avoid instead of going and mingling and getting advice from. And
indeed, that sort of romantic, assented to silent approval of the romantic entanglements that come out of these 12-step meetings that are on the part of the folks like Monica Richardson, who made this documentary, claim that AA knows that this is going on and they basically approve of it.
I think that when you turn a blind eye, I think a lot of people, and certainly the lawyers that are representing Carla's parents, there's a degree of responsibility, and it comes down to negligence. If you turn a blind eye, if you know these things are happening under your roof, then you have an obligation. At least that's the assertion in the lawsuit. Jim
Holt. Do you go by James? I never even asked you that. I always called you Jim. Jim Holt.
Yeah. The IRS calls me James. Yeah.
Jim Holt, the Santa Clarita Valley Signal. Thank you so much for your time, and thanks for stopping by.
Thanks.
All right. For details on these and other news stories about mental health, check out the Mindset Report online at mindsetreport.com. Today's main topic, geriatric psychology, the double whammy of age. My guest, Professor of Psychology, Dr. Carla Edwards. She researches and teaches at Northwest Missouri State University. Talk to me a little bit about your work with the geriatric community.
There's some stigma with aging and who we are as growing older. And so I got very interested in the research related to growing older and what it means to grow old gracefully, and what works and what doesn't work, and what are recommended by experts. And then I headed to one of the local residential care facilities for older adults and started to do some work. And some of the things I started seeing actually were kind of frightening to me, that we take away so much freedom from older adults. The facility I work at, the Nottoway County Nursing Home, is the only facility in my area that is certified to provide mental health services. And so I also work with mental illness there. But that's a double whammy, being an older person with physical health problems and then also mental health problems. And I think the assumption oftentimes is that this is no longer a person. And there is so much wisdom there, so much that we can give to others as we grow older. Some of the things I see sometimes are, and the research suggests that we will take things out of their hands and we will do it for them, and that's one of the biggest mistakes that we can make. You know, a better thing is to be a little bit patient and kind. When someone is growing older, the memory doesn't work quite as well. It's reasonable to expect that when we face people growing older that we love, that we take a little bit of time and sit still a little bit longer and wait while they gather their thoughts. They're worth waiting for, instead of completing sentences for them.
And indeed, you did some scholarship in this area along with Dr. Ryan Wessel. I believe it was back in 2012 that was published in the Journal of Education and Developmental Psychology. Talk about the special challenges and what have you found in your work, the practical application working with the geriatric community, older individuals. What are those special challenges, or what are the top challenges, the issues as you see them, that present with respect to mental health?
You know, I think that it's so very important to consider that as we grow older, we change. And our bodies change, and our minds change. And that happens at every developmental event in our lives. And as we have used skills to change, to address issues, as we have faced marriage, parenthood, divorce, deaths, graduations, weddings, sometimes we forget that growing older is another normal part of life, and that we need to use those same skills that we used when we were younger in order to adapt. I think some of the stigma related to aging, we pick up ourselves and we think, okay, so it aches, so I'm not going to go walk. Instead of, okay, you know what, I ache, so I'm going to have to find a different way of exercising. Maybe I need to explore water aerobics. But, you know, there's a lot of stigma attached to that. That's what old people do. Well, for crying out loud, what the research and literature tells me very clearly is those individuals who learn to adapt and recognize when change is necessary as they get older tend to have much more satisfying lives. So if I'm a little wobbly on my feet, and I recognize that as I get a little older, my balance is not quite as good, maybe it's time to attach all the throw rugs very, very solidly to the floor or get rid of them. As I start getting into my 70s and 80s, and maybe it's important to get a walker and I feel kind of embarrassed, maybe I need to explore all the different options and maybe get a pink one because that's cool. But if I adapt, if I use the larger print, if I see my doctor more often related to my health issues, if I read about growing older and what that means, just like I did when I was thinking about becoming a parent, chances that I'm going to adapt are much higher. But I do think there is that stigma also, not just with mental health issues, but with aging. And then when you add mental health issues to the aging issue, those do present special challenges because we change biochemically. We change as we grow older biochemically. The brain changes and alters. So thinking that the same medications that I used when I was younger, or the same type of therapy, or the same strategies I used for coping when I was 30 are going to work now when I'm 60, maybe you should think that through. Just like as my body grows and changes, I may need a different size of clothing. I may need to develop some other coping skills.
When we think about aging typically as a society, people typically associate, I would suspect, the idea of aging with mental health, the mental health issues of memory loss, of slower mental acuity, or less mental acuity, or whatever the right word that goes with that, and an increased level of anxiety. I remember as my parents were aging, they made it to their 80s. I noticed in them that they startled a lot easier while they were still driving. As they approached in their late 70s, as they approached their 80s, they didn't deal with the stress of being out on the roadway with a lot of cars, and eventually they stopped driving. Is that the right way to think about the mental issues associated with aging?
I think I like to think, that was good, Carla. It is important to look at it. I think it's change. It is a change. The world happens to be wrapped up around an average range of functioning, and the world and everything in it is geared towards that particular certain level of functioning. So when I'm looking at facing what are my individual changes, and everybody changes differently. If I could predict exactly how each one of us would change and could prepare for that and help you prepare for that, I'd be wealthy. But we change in different ways. So I like to see it as change. I think it's a little easier to adapt. Probably that has a lot to do with my view of mental health overall and cognitive functioning overall. I know that we are really keyed into this idea of an average, of a normal curve. And that has been very prevalent in our ideas about psychology, about development, about human development, that there is a certain range within which functioning is desirable. That's largely because most people do function within that range. And so the world is geared towards those folks. If I'm not within that range, what that means to me as a person is that I'm going to have to find some ways to adapt. I don't see it as an aging and cognitive decline, and again, there's different levels for different reasons, as something that actually I would see as a weakness, as long as I, the individual who's growing older, am willing to step up and say, okay, here's some things I need to start doing. I need to start making lists. Okay, now I'm not going to drive. I'm going to take the bus. And actually, you know what? If younger people would take the bus more often, the world would probably be less polluted. I think that when we see it as frailty, when we see it as weakness, when people are outside of that normal range, we stigmatize. We do a disservice to anyone who's trying to seek help. Because then what happens is we're going to hide that. My father, he just did not want to admit for a very long time that he was having hearing problems, just like not going to get the hearing aid, not going to go do it. He didn't want to use a cane. I don't want to use a cane. I don't want people to see me using a cane. Interestingly enough, he did end up getting a hearing aid, and he did do much better in conversations with me. But he never really got into the walker and the cane. And my father died of a fall in a care facility. He was a very high-functioning man at the time. But he had some balance problems. And, he wasn't expected to be in a nursing home with a high level of care because he was very high-functioning. And I love my father more than life itself. But I do believe that his own feelings of shortcoming and frailty kept him from utilizing things that were available for his help. And I miss him. I miss him terribly. So I got to tell you, when I get to be that age, I'm using a cane.
But at the same time, that our parents can be some of the most stubborn people that we ever wanted to come across. Oh, my goodness. And it seems that if it comes from someone other than us, their children, they're apt to listen or be a little bit more open to it. But bringing up the issue with our parents is tough. What's the best way to go about doing that?
I think it's important to love and to motivate. I have not really ever ran into many people who respond really well to derogatory comments or pointing out their flaws. On the other hand, there's a strategy in psychology called motivational interviewing that works really relatively well and has a lot of research support.
Talk to us about that. How does that work? How can I? Is that something I could use, or somebody who's listening to this program?
Absolutely, it's
give us a sample
at a
of
clinical
that.
level. It's used. I love you. I care about you, and I'm worried about losing you. I'd love you to consider using a cane, and you know what? I'll get one and I'll use it with you. Or we'll go get some specially carved ones. You're important to me, and I know that you love me. I know that you want a better life. I know that you want to function at a higher level. And if somebody makes fun of your cane, I'll go after them. And it may not, but that gentle persuasion, motivating, finding the reasons that they will engage. I'm thinking of my own spouse when he is struggling with memory situations. I think he's a pretty typical middle class rural male, and if he doesn't remember it, it didn't happen.
Right.
And he's quite a bit older than I am, so occasionally he doesn't remember, and I know that when I say, "Oh, really? I did tell you," we generally have a problem. On the other hand, if I smile and just kindly repeat it and realize, you know what, his memory doesn't work as well as mine does sometimes. And mine doesn't work as well as his does sometimes. Patience, listening, kindness, thoughtfulness, and my own personal self-care. When you're working with your parents, when you're working with older people, when you're working with people who are outside of that average range, it's always very, very important to remember that the world is not built around that. And so, yes, it's going to take extra effort. It's going to take extra time. It's going to take resources. It's going to take trial and error to figure out what works, because the world and the way that houses and technology and cars and shopping are built around the average person.
All right, so I'm not going to let you off the hook that easy, because my experience has been, with all due respect, Dr. Edwards, it's just not that easy. I talk to my folks, and you get I don't want to hear it, and they give you the brush off. So then what's the next step? Do you just keep going at them gently with understanding? Is it okay to enlist helps? Go across the street. They love talking to the neighbor, and you kind of form this conspiracy of everybody they talk to and say, look, when you have a chance, drop this bug in their ear about, it'd be okay to use the walker. It'd be all right to, have the toilet seat that's a little bit higher up to make things easier. Is that okay?
Well, you're making a really good point, and I think you are exactly right. It is not easy. And one of the things that is not easy is, and that's what I mean with self-care, is that I have to take care of myself when I'm working with them, because they have a right, just like I do. Every human being has a right. We have a right to make our own choices. And my father chose not to use a cane, and he did have that right. And I am not a fan of taking away rights of people who don't fit in within the average range. I think that's a part of becoming less judgmental and more accepting of others. That, things don't always turn out the way that I would like them to. And that with my parents and with myself as I grow older, we make mistakes. And mistakes should be accepted as a normal part of life.
And stubbornness
when you're
should be accepted as a normal part of life. I'm sure that my folks are not unique in that regard, because I've heard these types of stories from other people. But oh my goodness, they can be so boneheaded, pig-headed, whatever the phrase is. So then, given that, And that's one of the things that I think about. And people, my contemporaries that I've discussed this idea with, think about where is the line, Dr. Edwards, between respecting their wishes, their right to make a decision that we may not agree with, and pushing them to do something that's going to be arguably, theoretically, at least in their best interest in terms of their physical and mental well-being.
You're not going to like my answer. You know what? If I knew where that line was, I would be a very wealthy person. That line it's different for every relationship, and Farah Abraham, who she's a cross-cultural researcher who talks about that every time two people come together, we create a new culture. And that, sometimes accepting the amount of work and time it's going to take to figure things out and to work through things. And honestly, truthfully, if I knew the right way to do everything, I'd be doing it myself. And I'd be selling it. I get a little distressed. Even in psychology, sometimes we say, oh, here's the right way to do it, or here's the right way to listen, or here's the right way to talk. And I've been a psychologist long enough that I have watched the research change and change and change again, and sometimes come back to original points. They used to tell us that with death and dying, that there are stages, and the Kubler-Ross stages, and I still respect that, and I still use that when I work with people. But recent research tells me everybody does it their own way and in their own time. And that when we try to say, if I were to say to you, oh, here's the way you should do it, I would do you a disservice. On the other hand, I can say, pack up a toolkit. Be patient and kind. Also use self-care. Also, maybe learn and talk to your own parents and say, hey, how will you respond to me? Talk to other people about how they've talked to their parents. Go see a therapist and talk to them about, here's what I'm struggling with, and get that toolkit packed up with dozens and dozens of different ways to approach the problem. And like any good problem solver, make a decision about what looks best and what maybe the research is supporting or as a standard right now that you're seeing in society. Try it, evaluate it. If it doesn't work, try something else. Get
as many tools in that toolbox as you possibly can.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, I never share my religious beliefs or values with people, but I do know that there are lots of other ways to get help and assistance in our world, in our community, than just psychotherapy or psychology. Church communities, peer-led support groups, research and literature that's available online is amazing.
Yeah.
You can get anything at your fingertip, but you have to be careful about the resource that you're looking at. But also books, and we are an information-rich society. There's no reason not to fill up that toolkit.
Yeah. Let me talk to you about a line from the research that I referenced earlier that you did along with Dr. Wessel. Again, it's called Principles of Longevity and Aging, Interventions to Enhance Older Adulthood. Under the section Mental Health, older patients with mental health issues tend to wait until problems affect physical health or an accident occurs to seek help, and then help is often sought from medical professionals. Is that still the state of what we're looking at? Is that still how things happen with most individuals?
I would say not just older adults, but across our culture and our society. People wait to get help with mental health issues until they're suicidal, oftentimes. I see that in my rural community. It's one of my big frustrations with my practice, is that, if someone has a cold and that cold goes on for 2 or 3 weeks, we might even linger 4 or 5 weeks, but we're going to head to a doctor. Depression, on the other hand, people will struggle for 2 or 3 years with it before they get help. And a lot of that is the stigma attached to it. And older adults, I think, are more keyed into that stigma at a personal level. It's a weakness to go get help for depression. It's a weakness to go get help for anxiety. But it's not a weakness to go get help for COPD. You know, and I'm pretty sure that for me, if I actually had a choice about whether I'd rather have depression or COPD, I would choose depression.
Really?
It's treatable. It's treatable. About 60 to 65% of the folks who do psychotherapy get better. About 65% of the people who do medication get better. If you combine both medication and psychotherapy, you're talking about moving into an absence of symptoms, usually within 4 to 8 weeks, and getting better. People get better. Treatment works. And it's sad when I think of someone who's been struggling on their own, trying to, grit their teeth and pull themselves up by their own bootstraps and deal with their depression, and it's not going away, and it's not going away, and it's lasting years. And for me, that feels really sad. I don't think that it's necessary. I think it's a necessary agony that people go through because we put so much shame on getting help.
So therein enters the stigma piece, because if we viewed it like we viewed having a cold or, heaven forbid, breaking a bone or an infection of some type that you could see, we'd be more readily inclined to go get some help for it.
Yeah, if you have a colleague in the workplace and that colleague is sniffling and coughing, it's like the first thing you say is, you need to take care of that. Have you seen a doctor yet? Maybe you should go home. But if someone is tearful in the workplace and obviously struggling with some emotional issues, not that tears are always a bad thing in the workplace, don't get me wrong there. I think some compassion in the workplace is important, but they're obviously struggling maybe with some emotional issues, and we see them. We don't say anything because we don't want to shame them. We don't want to say, "Hey, have you gotten some help for that? Hey, let's you need to take care of this, or have you? Why don't you go home for a day?" And that interaction at a social level is extremely uncomfortable for both parties. And that's stigma, and that's sad.
Let me move on to another comment in this article with a follow-up. The sentence reads, "The two most commonly reported psychological problems in older adulthood are depression and anxiety." Two things.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you found in your continuing work since this paper was published in 2012? And is that something that is more prevalent in older folks as opposed to younger folks? Is that the point of that phrase, that sentence there?
Both depression and anxiety, in my opinion, are at epidemic levels across ages. They are very prevalent in our older adults, and a lot of that has to do with the lack of help seeking. Also, we live in a pretty rough world right now. We've been kind of in a little bit of an economic situation, and a lot of violence streams into our living rooms minute by minute by minute by minute. And we know about all the suffering all over the world every second. We are struggling a lot with jobs and unemployment, with immigration, with civil rights issues again. It's a little rough place to be living right now. And it's not surprising that we see a rise in depression and anxiety. Older adults definitely are a special case. They're often isolated and alone. And part of that is we are so desperately fast-paced that when someone is moving a little bit slower, taking the time and walking slow with them, can be seen as an inconvenience. And that's incredibly sad. You know, one of my favorite things to do is, one of my best friends, Esther, is, she's about 85, and her and her husband visit us quite a bit, and I love to spend time with them, because one of the things that happens is they love to just sit and talk, and they love to walk and walk slow, and it slows me down. It helps me to be a more centered and a better person. And I think when we see being around older people as an inconvenience, we miss out on that. And also, they need us. They need our support. Everyone in this universe needs human kindness and connection to people. And when they don't get that, and we isolate them and put them in homes over on the other side of town, and don't attend to them as family, it's very difficult. It's very difficult.
And along that line, further down in the article, you have a line in there that reads, practitioners have consistently found that short-term family-oriented prevention and intervention efforts with older adults can reduce mild depression and anxiety. Is that what you're talking about when you're talking about spending time, getting closer?
Absolutely. And, I believe that across the board, that with mild psychological problems, just like with mild physical problems, like if you have a mild cold and and it goes away in a few days, you stay home, you push fluids, you do the right things. When we struggle with very mild depression or anxiety, social support is crucial to recovery. And social support can be enough for recovery. You shouldn't have to come see me. And that's not in all cases. And I think that I don't want to be misunderstood, that I'm saying that doing things on your own is always the right way. Of course not. No more so than for physical problems. It's let's put it this way. Social support is the number one resiliency factor when we're looking at healing from mental health issues. It delineates those people who have severe mental health issues who end up in long-term hospitalization settings from those who end up functioning at a high level in community. That stopping, listening, supporting, with older adults, attention, becoming a part of community. Sometimes the transportation issue is incredibly awful. We've lost enough functioning that we can't drive. So what happens next? What happens if I'm on a limited income? Communities oftentimes do have transportation, but sometimes it's pretty scheduled and doesn't always meet the needs of the individual. I wish there were more ways that we could feel comfortable taking more time to help each other. It's hard in this world where young people have to hold down jobs, sometimes two jobs to make ends meet, to say, hey, we need to take time for each other. But we do. We really do.
It sounds like a good argument for multi-generational households, having the grandparents, the older adults in our lives actually, if not live in the same physical house, at least be close enough by so that makes it easier on both the young folks who are trying to hold down the job and deal with perhaps their own children as well as the aging parent.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I think it's also a good argument for championing multi-generation communities, not just families, where we plan activities. Oftentimes, we will plan activities and make sure there's activities for the children who are attending. But at the same time, do we also look at people at all other developmental stages in life and say, okay, so how are we going to get people from the parking lot up to where the wedding's being held because there's a steep hill? Are we going to make sure that there's someone there to help our older adults up the hill? It takes a little extra planning to be inclusive. And I think it's time.
But it's certainly doable, in your opinion.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
One of the things that I found interesting in this 2012 article, the sentence reads, impairment in cognitive functioning is common in depressed and anxious older adults and this is the part that got me, can mimic dementia, making this group especially difficult to treat.
Absolutely, absolutely. And once you treat the depression successfully, if it is indeed depression and cognitive function that it is limited due to depression, that cognitive functioning will come back. And sometimes the best way to figure out if it is dementia or depression is to treat the depression and to kind of wait and see what happens and how much of the functioning returns. I think it is really interesting. It is much easier to just say that they're just not on target or they've lost it now, instead of saying, hey, maybe there are some things that we can actually do with people who are in their 70s and 80s that can return them to a higher level of functioning, and instead of just giving up so easily.
Two areas, and I'm not going to go into the individual language that you've used and written about in the research, but let me just give the headings and just throw out whatever you think you want folks to know about this. The first is activity and mental health, and the other is cognitive strategies. Give us a couple of tidbits on each of those.
Activity is so very important. It's so important that in psychology, the therapy that is often used with older adults is called behavior activation. It is very important to keep active physically as well as mentally at whatever level is feasibly and reasonably possible. The brain is a muscle, and it's attached to the rest of the body.
Yeah.
And when I am moving my body, I am functioning in my brain. And when my brain is functioning, it controls my body. The two are inseparable. And so when I disconnect brain from body, and I'm just going to do a lot of puzzles to keep my mind busy, and I don't want to go do physical therapy, or if I only engage in physical therapy and I don't want to do activities with my brain, it's would be similar to only using your right arm and keeping your left arm in a sling. Pretty soon, one or the other, the left arm is going to lose its mobility. Being active as a whole human being, diet, exercise, mental strategies, puzzles, games. I have a lot of older adults who have become kind of enamored of Facebook lately. And yes, it does take a lot of time to teach and to help them understand and get past some of their own mental blocks. But once they figure out that they can see pictures of their kids and their grandkids and snoop their pages without having to bother them in their lives every day, it can be a lot of fun. And you know, learning new things is important. So those cognitive strategies, picking up a hobby, learning, if I like crossword puzzles, let's maybe try some other types of puzzles. Let's maybe get an iPad and see if we like some of the games. Let's go to a different genre of movies. Let's get audio books. Let's explore lots of options. Let's learn Braille, because maybe my eyesight is a little bit failing and I'm worried. Keeping busy is important.
Dr. Carla Edwards, Northwest Missouri State University, tenured professor there in the Department of Psychology. Thank you so much.
You are welcome.
And thank you to my other guests at the top of the show, reporter Jim Holt, Santa Clarita Valley Signal. That's it for today's show. Check out Mindset, the podcast on iTunes, iHeartRadio, TuneIn Radio, and YouTube. Until next week, for Mindset, mental health news and information, I'm your host, James Curtis. Dare to see mental health differently, because understanding why we do what we do helps us all do better. See you next week.